having your own therapist. I hope you're all doing well, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining again today. Looking into our own mind is not that easy. And sometimes if we really start to go to the core of our problems, we get this aversion like, oh no, I don't feel like it today. I don't want to hear about it. Know that that can come. And I'm going to ask you to stay with me and allow these feelings to arise. And you are very welcome to say in the chat box whatever you feel you need to say in order to feel better. But it is normal to work through difficult, I don't know if there are aspects of the mind, but hearing the truth is not always easy. Hearing the truth about our own mind, how we function, is not easy. And so when people come to Tushita, they make a commitment to stay for 10 days. But I know on the third day, the fourth day, many people are like, oh, I don't want to hear this anymore, you know? But then the fifth day, the sixth day, things start to shift inside. And then on day number 9 and 10, they feel so happy, so much love in the heart, right? So that's going to come. I almost can promise you that. But you have to stick with me and work through this. Okay. So we start today with a little meditation to focus the mind and set a good motivation, as I explained to you yesterday. So find a posture that is comfortable for you. And in order to focus the mind, it is always good to straighten the back and at the same time be relaxed. And then give yourself a little bit of time to let the mind settle down, to let the mind rest. And so to let the mind rest, you can choose to let the mind rest on your body. Or if you're familiar with meditation, you can also let your mind rest on your breath. And while we rest the mind in the present moment, we let go of all the thoughts that are still caught up in the past. And we also let go of all the thoughts that are already preparing for the future. They all come to rest in the present moment. And then we set up a positive motivation for listening, reflecting, meditating today. And we engage in these activities in the first place in order to learn to know our own mind, in order to find ways of solving our problems that are more skillful than we have at the moment. And we can find more skillful ways when we develop our wisdom mind and when we develop our compassion. We all have a huge potential for wisdom and for compassion. We all have the potential to understand reality as it is. And we all have the potential to hold all sentient beings in our heart. So developing such potential, we never do that just for ourselves. Why would we hold all sentient beings in our heart just for ourselves? Yeah, we also do it because we recognize that the only reason why we have all these causes and conditions that we have at the moment is due to the kindness of so many sentient beings. So when we start developing our potential of wisdom and compassion, we do that not just for our own sake, but also because we recognize the kindness of others and we wish to repay that kindness by helping them to the best of our ability. Which means developing our wisdom and compassion is increasing our ability to help. So somehow include all sentient beings in your heart. Okay, so now we can start. So yesterday we used the chat for your comments and your questions. And yes, this afternoon I had a look at what you all had written, and I was very happy to see that so many of you had contributed to that. And I want to encourage you to keep doing that. You know, when questions come to your mind, feel free to ask them in the chat. And I will try to go back to them as much as I can. If I don't do it today, I will look at them somewhere tomorrow and then come back to them when it is a good time in the teachings. I do going to ask you to keep the questions with the topic and with the things that we are talking about, because I know that some of you have these questions that you have been wondering for such a long time, and you think, yes, this is my opportunity. I'm going to ask these questions, but they're not really related to the topic. So I cannot answer them in this course. The course is not long enough for that. But if you would like me to answer some of these questions, you know, the next course that I'm doing, there is a whole day, the last day, for the sponsors, where there is a lot of time to go into these kind of questions. So look it up on Toshita website and use that opportunity for these questions. So what did we speak about yesterday? And I'll give a very short summary. We spoke about that we, just as all sentient beings, we want to be happy and we want to be free of suffering. And if we closely look into all the actions that we are doing, then all the actions are an attempt to find freedom from suffering and to find more happiness. We also said that all our minds, the mind of all sentient beings, is by nature pure, like the blue sky, unobstructed by clouds. That's the nature of our mind. That's the nature of the mind of an animal. That's the nature of the mind of the person who harmed you. That's the nature of the mind of the person that you love. Each and every mind is pure from the beginning, by nature pure. But in our current state, we have all kinds of disturbing emotions arising in the mind, especially when problems arise, right? And that can cloud the mind. It makes the mind unpeaceful, very busy. And sometimes you can be so in your problem that you think, I just want to get out of my mind. Just give me a break, right? Because sometimes thoughts, it seems that they're never going to stop. And I'm sure that you all have experienced that. And I'm sure that many of you have tools to deal with that. You know, maybe you go for a run, maybe you go in a hot bath, maybe you go to the sauna. I don't know. There are activities that we can do in order to distract the mind from that problem, from that busyness. But sometimes as soon as that activity is gone, the next day the mind is busy again. So we all experience that at times. And so Buddhism, although it is a very ancient philosophy, it is still applicable today because the workings of the mind, the way the mind works, has not changed over time. It's still exactly the same as 2,500 years ago. And so Buddhism is like a tool to make the mind more peaceful, to make the mind calm. When the mind is peaceful, there is a freedom from disturbing emotions. And when there is freedom from the disturbing emotions, there is a lot of joy and happiness in the mind. So Buddhism is very much focused on what we are experiencing right now. There is a huge philosophy that you can study, but that philosophy is only there as an instruction for practice. Right? And some people need a lot of instruction before they get it. You know, I had to do a lot of study. And some people need a little bit of instruction and they get it straight away. Right? So Buddhism accommodates each and every one of us. We all have different needs. So we also spoke about what is a person and what is the body and the mind, where are they coming from? So I said that a person is that which is imputed independence upon the 5 aggregates, or independence on the body and the mind. Later today, I'm going to talk more about what it means, being imputed independence, right? So we hold that for a little bit. Talking about the main cause of the body and the main cause of the mind helps us to understand that the body and the mind are 2 different types of energy. The body is made out of matter, atoms, comes from mommy and daddy. And the mind is made out of, we say, consciousness, but it is not matter. Mind is like space. And in Buddhism, the definition of mind is that which is clear and knowing. Clear means like space, right? We can't see it, we can't touch it, it doesn't have any shape, no color, like space. And then within that space, all kinds of emotions and thoughts and beliefs arise. They arise in the mind. And although they arise in the mind, they are not in the nature of the mind. Just like the clouds arise in the blue sky, are not in the nature of the blue sky. So are all the disturbing emotions, the thoughts, the beliefs that arise in the mind, not in the nature of the mind. They're not the nature of the mind. They don't even touch the nature of the mind. So whatever arises in the mind doesn't exist inherently in the mind. If something would exist inherently in the mind, that would mean that a certain aspect of us would be always findable in the mind. And we know that the mind is always changing, right? Sometimes certain emotions or thoughts can stay for a long time in the mind, but then it changes, always. And some memories can come back and give you a similar feeling, and it might appear like you have a similar mind than before, but if you think about it, it is a different mind because it is a different point of time. And it is not exactly the same as before. It is always changing. So whatever arises in the mind is impermanent by nature. And once the causes of that which has arisen, once the causes for our delusions, the causes for our disturbing emotions, once they are exhausted, then the disturbing emotion naturally dissolves back into the mind. It disappears. And so then we made also a beginning with looking at the way we are trying to find happiness. We try to find happiness by following our feelings. True? When you sit and you feel uncomfortable, you feel it and you immediately adjust your posture. When you sit for a long time and you feel a little bit restlessness coming, you get up and you make yourself a cup of tea, or, you walk. And then maybe when you keep walking, you again feel restless, or you feel you need a break, you need to rest. You sit, you go back to sitting, or you go back to laying down. Right? We follow our feelings. The rational mind is not so much involved in that. We do that automatically. Right? Sometimes you can find yourself in places that you think, how did I get here? Yeah, I know that when I was still driving a car, often whole periods of time, I had no memory. It's like, oh, suddenly I'm already here. How did that happen? How did I drive the car without being really consciously present? Right? It happens automatically. Because we have trained our mind for such a long time in working with this mechanism, this tool, following our feelings. So when, in general, we can say when pleasant feelings arise in the mind, we crave for more. When unpleasant feelings arise in the mind, we crave to be free from that. And we crave to be free from that with our aversion. And so I use the word craving because craving is what really motivates us. And within Buddhist philosophy, we say we as human beings, but also the animals and also other beings that we cannot see, we are living in the desire realm. Desire, attachment is what brings us here. Attachment is what motivates us to take this body. And so attachment is what motivates us to find what we like and to be free from what we do not like. So today we're going to look more into this, and we're going to see that no matter how we try, if we keep following our feelings in order to be happy, we will never get what we really want. And we always will stay dissatisfied or maybe even suffer. So why is that? Why is it that following the feelings never can bring us the result that we want? Because I think that maybe we have to think about that. What kind of happiness are you looking for? What are the qualities of that happiness? Because somehow when we follow our feelings, we have an expectation of what is going to happen when we get that object, right? We think about, oh, I really would like to have a new house and, you know, with beautiful this and beautiful that. And once I have that, I'm going to feel like this and this and this. And then we work really hard, and we eventually maybe we are able to buy the house, and we have the house, and then it's like, you know, maybe for a little while we have a very blissful feeling, but then the problems are going to come. Or then the feeling changes. And we think, but I thought it was going to bring me peace, you know. So in general, if I ask this question in class, I see nobody reacting today. You can tell me what kind of happiness you want. When I ask that in class, people say, I want peaceful happiness. I want my mind to be peaceful. I want these disturbances to calm down. And so what we expect is when we engage in something, somehow we expect that that feeling is going to stay. And it never does. So why is that? That is because we cannot see the nature of reality. We cannot see the nature of our existence. And we'll talk about that today. What appears to us and how things exist. So in order to understand that, we need to look into our mind. How does a mind work? How do we perceive things with our senses? And how do we think about them? How does the conceptual mind work? And then what does that do with objects? And then we're also going to look into suffering, what that refers to for us and what that refers to in Tibetan Buddhism. Because if we want to be free from suffering, right? Happiness is kind of being free from suffering. Do you agree with that? If I'm free from suffering, totally free from suffering, I feel happy. So we need to know what is suffering. Right? Because if we only see part of the suffering and we try to become free of that, there will always be a leftover. So suffering will always arise again and again and again. And we think, but I really tried to get rid of that. There it is again. How is that possible? Right? So we talk about that today. So that's quite a lot. And I see there are some questions, and it was an important one. So somebody says, I cannot hear you. I'm going to think that might be a problem from your side. So there was a feeling, what is the difference between feeling and emotion? So feelings arise in every moment of consciousness. Every moment of mind, feeling arises. And then when pleasant feelings arise, we react. Pleasant feelings are followed by attachment that wants more of that. And when unpleasant feelings arise in the mind, then that is followed by aversion. I want less of that. I want to be separated from that. So the feeling arises, and in dependence on the feeling, we have a reaction, either attachment or aversion, or anything that comes from attachment and aversion. Attachment and aversion is a reaction, is a disturbing emotion. It disturbs the mind. The feeling in itself doesn't necessarily disturb the mind. It is our reaction that disturbs the mind. So that's a very important difference. Feelings, we say in Buddhism, are the result of previous actions. So if we have a lot of good karma, we experience a lot of good feelings, independence on the sense objects, independence on how we think. Many good feelings arise. These feelings come from previous karma. Then our reaction to the feelings is what creates our new karma. These are actions that leave imprints in the mind and that will ripen at a later point in time into feelings. So feelings and actions, they have a very strong connection with each other. And so in order to find happiness, it's very important to know that connection and to see that if we follow the feelings, we actually follow, what we try to do is we try to influence how we feel because we want to feel more often like that. But what we are doing is we're actually creating the causes for getting the opposite of that. So I will come back to that later and explain that more. So without feeling, is there any existence of human being? I would say the existence of human being in every moment of mind, feeling arises. So we are looking for lasting happiness. I see that the people say for peace and calmness of the mind. Are they the same or different? That's up to you. They can be the same, they can be different. How do we know that we want lasting happiness when we don't know what it feels like? That's a good question. So if you have nothing more than the temporary happiness that we experience at the moment, how can I even think about that there is some other kind of happiness, long-lasting happiness? I don't even know how it feels like, right? So what am I looking for? But maybe you can think about when you get something what you want, there is always something missing. There is also always some kind of, yeah, but if I also had this, it would even be better. As if it is not perfect. And I think that feeling shows that something different is possible, but we don't know how to go there. If the happiness that we have right now is the most perfect happiness that we could have, we would be perfectly happy, and we are not. Right? My mom always said, well, that's just how it is, there is nothing more to get in life. And I never believed it, never took it. Right? Not that I had any tools to get anything else than the normal pleasures, but I never believed that is what I needed to be satisfied with. I felt like, no, I want to look for more. So yesterday I mentioned that all the problems are coming from the mind, right? And some people, they might get shocked and think, is that really true? Right? Or were you aware of that your problems are coming from the mind? Sometimes we have big problems and we might think, well, if this person would just behave a little bit differently, I wouldn't have all these problems. Or if this person hadn't done that to me, I would not feel all these horrible things at the moment in myself. I would not feel so hurt. I would not feel that my mind is so clouded. I would feel, light and happy. Or maybe you feel that, oh, if this person would behave a little bit differently, then everything would be perfect. You ever think like that? That shows that maybe when you think about it, you can think, yeah, it's coming from my mind. But the way we react, often we blame the situation, somebody else for how we feel. So Buddhism is really about taking our own responsibility, saying whatever I feel and how I react to things is my responsibility. Let me see where we are. So at the moment, the way we function, the way we find happiness is by grasping at the sense world, right? We make contact with objects, whether these are visual objects or things that we can hear or smell or taste or touch, or objects that we think about. We try to find happiness by engaging with these objects, with making contact with the objects. And we try to be free of these objects that give us unpleasant feelings or that are the condition for unpleasant feelings to arise in the mind. And so at the moment, we are quite in a life that we have choice. You know, we can have this sense of independence of I decide what I like and what I don't like. I decide what I have and what I don't have. I decide what I'm going to buy and what I'm not going to buy, whom I'm with or whom I'm choose not to be with, right? And so if we are really able to fulfill our own needs and stay away from things that upset our mind, we might have the feeling we're quite in control over our life, right? And then that control over our life, it gives us the idea that I am making the decision. I have the freedom to do so. I am free to choose whatever I want. Have you ever had that feeling? And Buddhism says, but in actuality, you know, you're not free at all. It is your attachment and your aversion that is in charge. If you don't like something and you move away, that's your aversion that is doing that. You have been doing that for lifetimes, you know. It's just this lifetime you have more conditions that you do not have to sit with the things that you don't like. And you do not have to sit with the fact that you don't really get what you need. So yeah, I would say you have very good karma. Having very good karma might create the illusion that you are free to choose whatever you want. And so we need to recognize that that freedom that we experience is actually an illusion. It's not a real freedom. We are dictated by what we like and what we don't like. And we need to follow that. And we can check that, you know, if something happens, if you have a life like this and you are quite in control and you feel that you're very free to do whatever you want, and something small happens which is not in accordance with your wishes, how do you react? Do you react with saying, okay, you know, things can happen like that? Or do you react by saying, you know, changing into a little, you know, throwing a tantrum like a 2-year-old child? Which one do you do? If you have a tantrum, if you get really upset, if something small happens that you don't like, if you cannot get what you want, that shows how you are under the control of your attachment and aversion. If your mind can say, oh, well, you know, doesn't matter, and you're really not moved, you're really not reacting, then you have grown up a little bit. You know, you're more an adult. Your mind is not reactive. You have overcome your disturbing emotions. That is freedom. So this is what we try to develop when we practice Buddhism. So if we look into what we grasp at, you know, we can think, well, I follow the things that I like, you know, so the things that I like to eat, that like to smell, like to wear, I make sure that I have all that. But what is the mind? What keeps the mind busy? You know, and if you really look into what keeps the mind busy, we are grasping a lot at merely imaginary images that arise in the mind. For instance, how much time is your mind busy with things that have happened in the past? You're thinking about it, you're ruminating, you go over it again and again, and you think, why did he do that? Why did that happen to me? Why didn't I? Why? All these questions. And I think what we're trying to do is sometimes we try to change what happened. We don't like it. We have difficulty accepting what happened. And somehow the mind goes over and over in order to change it. That has nothing to do with our reality. Our reality is right here in the present moment. The past already has happened, finished. And we're still trying to change it, but it has finished. You cannot change it. But I still want to try, but you cannot, you know? So this is what the mind, a lot of energy is taken into that. Especially if you have experienced a lot of things that you do not like in your life. You know, if you had a difficult upbringing, it can take a lot of your energy going over and over again in order to deal with the disturbing emotions that arise independent upon your experience. And then a lot of time we can also be in the future, you know, that non-existent future. The future is that what has not arrived yet. And we are thinking how we somehow can control what is going to happen in the future. Total fantasy. Nothing of what we think is true. Nothing of what we think has anything to do with our reality. And if you look back, you know, if you have the tendency to think about the future, and then you prepare like that, and then the things happen, how often do the things happen in the way you had envisioned them? How often? Hardly ever, no? Or never. Things always work out in a different way. But what we do when we engage in all these images, you know, either from the past or from the future, our energy is not in the present moment. And where can we develop our wisdom? Where can we develop our compassion? When we connect with the present moment. So that is something that we need to think about that. How thinking about the past, thinking about the future is not going to contribute really to a better past or a better future. It might actually do the opposite. And once you can see that, you know, that will help you to bring your mind back to the present moment, where your real power is, where you can really make changes that can affect you for the rest of your life. So another way that we are busy with images that are happening in the mind, you know, totally imagining things. If we think about something that we really like, for instance, we have seen this handsome boy or girl and wow, isn't she fantastic? What happens in your mind, you know? Your mind goes crazy. You have all these ideas arising in your mind. How wonderful and how fantastic you would feel if you're going to share time with that person and what that person is going to do and how that's going to feel, and nothing of that is true. And if we really look into what is that triggers this, you know, this is our attachment. And what attachment does, it totally exaggerates qualities that are not even in the person themselves. It doesn't even exist there. We're just fantasizing. But it feels so great, right? But it has no truth in it at all. And so what Buddhism says is what is really creating suffering is that we do not understand the truth. We do not understand reality as it is. We are all the time in these fantasies. So we first have to bring the mind home, to the here and now. So another mistake that we make in the mind, and I'm going to try to explain you how the mind works, because this is a very, very important mistake that we all make. And that is the cause of all the other problems that arise in the mind. So we have these images arising in the mind, right? We like somebody really a lot, and then this feeling comes and this idea about the person. And then what we do is we project that idea onto the person, and then we believe that the person really has these qualities. While in actuality, that is coming from our mind. And, for those of you who know what it is to fall in love, to really fall crazy in love, and then you go into a relationship with that person. After 6 months, 8 months, you suddenly wake up somehow and you think, what is he doing? How does she speak? And suddenly you start to see characteristics that you hadn't seen before. So they say the hormones that cause that attachment, or the attachment that causes these hormones, starts to wear off after a certain period of time. And you start to see things more in accordance with reality. So that is when we have strong attachment arising in the mind. But in actuality, the mind functions always like that. And we'll try to explain, So, so think about something that appears to you, something neutral. So we're not going to talk about attachment and aversion, but just how the mind works. Something, for instance, a blue table. Your eyes, your visual consciousness sees a blue table. And when you look at the blue table, you see blue, you see the table, you see the shape of the table, you see, even they say the impermanence of the table appears to your eyes. All the qualities from table, they appear to your visual consciousness. So we say then that our sense perception is what we call a collective engager. All the qualities of the object appear to the senses. Then, in dependence on that, we generate in our conceptual mind an image of the object, right? So that I can close my eyes and I think about the table, and table will appear to my eyes. Or I think about blue table, and blue table will appear to my mind, not to my eyes, to my mind. So there is an image that arises in my mind. And there is also the name that arises in my mind. That the mind, the conceptual consciousness, the consciousness that works when we close our eyes and recall the objects, works in a totally different way than our sense perception. The conceptual mind works by elimination. So if I think about blue table, my conceptual mind eliminates everything that is not blue table. And then what is left over is the blue table. Blue table has nothing else No characteristics except blue table. So we call the conceptual mind an eliminative engager. It engages the object by eliminating everything that is not the object. And so when I look at table, I see all the parts of the table. When I create an image of table, I see one object, table. I do not see the parts of the table. I see just table, one object. We call that a unitary appearance. It is every object is unitary in the conceptual mind. Or I have to think about I'm thinking about the parts of the table, then the parts of the table appear to my mind, right? But if I think about table, I only see one table, a unitary thing. And then the image in the mind is permanent. So in dependence on an impermanent phenomena, I generate a permanent image in my mind. And also when it arises in my mind, that image appears to be independent of anything else, as if it has its own entity. And so then what I do is I see the table, the image table comes to my mind, and then I project that image in my mind towards that object that I see. And then in the next moment, that object, that image that I have projected onto that blue table, that appears back to me. And then what I do, what I think, what I believe is that that image from my mind and the table outside, as if they are the same thing. We mix them together. You know, sometimes people even believe that if they think about their car, they're really thinking about their car. They do not realize that the car in the mind is a very different car than that object outside. They're happening in a different domain. The image of a unitary, permanent, independent thing happens in our mind. While outside are these objects that are impermanent. They are dependent on their parts. They are dependent upon causes and conditions. They are impermanent by nature. So we mix these two together, and then we think it is the same thing. We project the image on the mind onto the object, and then we believe that what we have created in the mind lives in the object. So when I see table, you know, an image arises in my mind of table, a unitary, permanent, independent thing, as if there is an entity, as if there is an objective entity in the table that makes it a table. If that entity would be really in the table, I should be able to find it when I look within the parts of the table. So I can analyze the table and say, okay, if this is the table the way I see it, you know, that projection, if that is really living here, I should be able to find it somewhere. And then you start looking for it in the object and you cannot find anything. You can, I should say, you cannot find that independent, inherently existent table within the table. That image that you made in your mind and projected onto the table, you cannot find that in the table. That lives in your mind, not in the table. Not in the table that is the object in front of you. Right? And so because the mind works like that, and it goes very fast, we are not even aware that we are doing it. We believe that each and every object, each and every person has a kind of objective entity within them. within it. And that is called, we believe that something exists inherently as being that. You know, I believe that the table exists inherently as a table. I somehow forget that the table arises from causes and conditions. You know, that I need wood, that I need a carpenter, that I need, before the wood became wood to make a table, it was a tree. And before it was a tree, it was a seed. I forget all that. I just have this one image of table, this entity table. So we project a kind of inherent existence, not a kind of, we project inherent existence onto each and every object, each and every person. We believe that, you know, when we think about I, who am I, there is this perception of a self, of me. And that self appears to be unitary, that appears to be quite permanent, right? It has been with me my whole life. And well, maybe it has changed a little bit, but also not really, you know, it is still the same me. And it appears to be independent in the sense that, you know, I can have the feeling myself, I am in control of my body and my mind. I am in control of my life. The I appears as almost a separate entity from body and mind, living somewhere in the body and the mind. Right? And we can, somebody asked yesterday, is the soul and the mind the same thing? So soul, in Buddhism would say, then how do you define a soul? You know, what are the qualities of a soul? If you would define the soul as something that is permanent, independent, unitary, as an entity living in and of itself, somewhere inside you, which is your essence, you know, then Buddhism would say something like that cannot exist. Because if it would exist, then we should investigate the body, we should investigate the mind, and we should be able to find that somewhere. Right? But if we look into the body, is there somewhere a soul? Is there somewhere a self? You know, surgeons haven't found it yet, right? They have cut up the whole body and they never came back from the surgery and said, I found the self. So the self is not living in the body. And we can do the same for the mind, you know, because you can think, well, myself is the mind. Or myself is my intuition, or myself is the observer of the mind, or myself is the whatever aspect you take of your mind. That's, you have to investigate. If you say the self is the observer, then you should be able to find that self when you look for the observer. And so these entities, we cannot find that. Something not being findable in the object shows that it doesn't exist inherently. But somehow, due to conditioning, you know, inherent existence appears to us all the time. It appears to our senses. Whatever we see appears as existing inherently. Whatever we hear appears as existing inherently. Whatever we think about appears as existing inherently. Holding on to that inherent existence is the root cause of all the disturbing emotions that arise in the mind. And especially holding on to an inherently existent self. You know, because I believe there is this I in me that has needs that I need to take care of, that I need to protect. Independence of that, my attachment and my aversion is functioning. True. So how do we know that something exists if we can't find it? That's a good question. So you can start looking for the self, you know, inside your body, inside your mind, and then you can't find it. Then does it exist? You know, yes, it does exist because we can see it, we can feel it, we can observe it. So it exists, but it doesn't exist inherently. How do I know it exists? Well, you know, we still have our consciousness observing that it exists. It just doesn't exist in the way it appears to us. It appears to us as if it exists inherently as an objective entity, while in actuality, such entity is not present. But things do exist. You know, things arise in dependence upon causes and conditions. They arise in dependence upon their parts. They arise in dependence upon the mind. So things do exist. Just not so concrete and solid as we believe they are. So that self-grasping mind, grasping at itself, holding it to be an independent, unitary, permanent self, while in actuality it doesn't exist like that. That self-grasping is the root of all the disturbing emotions. And also in dependence upon that self-grasping, the self-cherishing mind arises, that we have the feeling, my happiness is more important than your happiness. I am more important than you. You know, my feelings, they are more important than your feelings. My suffering is bigger than your suffering. You know, the poor me, when we suffer, it's like, oh, my suffering is so big. Nobody has any idea how much I suffer. That's the self-cherishing mind. The self-grasping mind, in order to realize that that mind doesn't exist in the way it appears to us, we need to train our wisdom mind. We need to understand the nature of reality. In order to change this or to transform the self-cherishing mind, we need to change our attitude. From a self-centered attitude, we need to open the heart. We need to start cherishing others. You know, then we change the attitude. By developing the wisdom that realizes the lack of such an inherent self, we develop our wisdom mind. And we can do that until we can see reality exactly as it is in every moment of mind. And that self-cherishing mind, we can transform that in a mind that has such great compassion that it wishes from the depth of your heart to work for the happiness of sentient beings in every moment of your life. So what is now not working for us, we can transform that. Right? So that is what Buddhism does, working on these two aspects, the wisdom aspect and the compassion aspect. So I need to speak faster. I need to speak a little bit more. I want to say something about happiness, the happiness that we have and the suffering that we have. Maybe I go first if I see if there's a question related to this. So if something doesn't exist inherently, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. For us, it almost appears like that, you know? We start looking for something in the object and we can't find it and it looks like the object disappears. Then nothing exists. But that's not true. You know, not finding that objective entity within the object doesn't make that the object doesn't exist anymore. The object is still there, but it exists in a different way than you thought it exists. The nature of its reality is not how it appears to you. So not existing inherently, but it does exist. There is a huge difference between not existing inherently and not existing. You know, they're not the same thing. They're totally different. And so the view of emptiness, so what if these teachings don't exist in the way they are presented? So, yeah. The view of emptiness may be applied to the Dharma itself. You know, everything is empty of inherent existence. Nothing exists inherently. Also, the Dharma doesn't exist inherently. Yes, you have to apply the view of emptiness to the Dharma itself as well. You know, but that doesn't make it non-existent. It functions in the world, but there is nothing findable that we can refer to as that is this. All right. Is that clear? Something is not findable, but it is still existing. Then I say a little bit about happiness and suffering. So what is the happiness that we know? What is the happiness that we experience in life? You know, it is the pleasure that we experience in dependence on having contact with the 6 sense objects. Good food, beautiful colors and shapes, nice sounds, pleasant company. You know, that is the happiness that we know. So as soon as happiness, as soon as pleasant feelings arise in the mind, attachment is there, trying to hold on to the feelings, craving for more. So when are we happy? When do we experience pleasant feelings? When we get what we want. Right? When we get what we want, we're happy. So this happiness is the happiness which is called pleasure. Pleasure is a specific quality of happiness. Pleasure is short-term, is not stable, is dissatisfactory by nature in the sense that, you know, even if you have something very good, still something is missing. Or once you have experienced it, very soon you want to have more. And so that is also a quality of that pleasure, that it doesn't last. Right? It comes and it goes. Well, if we check what kind of happiness we want, in general, people say, I want a more stable happiness, a more peaceful happiness, a calm happiness. And so that is a different quality. And in order to achieve that, to attain that kind of happiness, we need to do something different than what we have been doing so far. So before we go there, how we can find that happiness with the qualities of being peaceful and being stable, we need to, I'm going to say that happiness is going to come when we are free from suffering. And so then we need to know what is suffering. What do we need to be free of in order to experience that peaceful and calm happiness? So we can say, what is our suffering at the moment, you know? Our suffering at the moment is our pain, the pain that we feel, sickness that we experience, death that we experience. Suffering is also when I don't get what I want. Suffering is also when I get something that I don't want. Or when I get separated from something that I had and that I was very fond of to be close to. Right? Then we suffer. We get separated from something that we want, or we get something that we don't want. So our tools for finding happiness and being free from suffering is when pleasant feelings arise, we follow these pleasant feelings with attachment. Attachment arises naturally in the mind. When unpleasant feelings arise in the mind, naturally aversion arises in an attempt to be free of that unpleasantness. That is like our tool that we have. This is a tool that all sentient beings have, not just human beings. We can also observe that in animals. You know, when you have a nice bowl of food for a dog, the dog is wagging the tail and is coming to you, and you can see that the dog is happy. Right? When you hit the dog, you can see that the dog is unhappy, doesn't like it, reacts with aversion, tries to get away from you. We all have that tool, you know, giving us temporary pleasure. It looks like it is giving us temporary pleasure, and separation from the things that we do not like. Separation from suffering. Separation from pain. And so that aversion, these unpleasant feelings that arise in the mind, you know, this suffering that arises, it is discomfort, it is unpleasantness. In Buddhism, that is only the most coarse level of suffering. And it is called the suffering of pain, or the suffering of suffering. So we are trying to move away from that layer of suffering all the time. Animals do the same, because we're using the same mechanism to move away from that. So but then Buddhism says, but it's not the only suffering that exists, you know. So there are two more layers of suffering within Buddhism. And if you want to feel the happiness that is a freedom from suffering, you need to eliminate them as well. So the first level is what is called the suffering of change. And the suffering of change refers to all the pleasurable experiences that we have. So I just talked about removing that. Don't think that we have to remove the pleasure, you know, it's not true. Some people go in panic. Oh my gosh, I cannot separate from my pleasure. No, we can keep the pleasure for a while. But Buddhism calls these pleasurable experiences the suffering of change. Why? Because these experiences are also, by nature, they are in the nature of suffering. Because they do not last, they're not stable, they're dissatisfactory by nature. And even if they're very beautiful, you know, we have amazing experiences, there is always something missing. It's not perfect for a long time. So real happiness is stable, which means that the more we produce it, the happier we become. And we cannot say that from the pleasures that we have, right? If I think about the pleasure of eating chocolates, if that would be real pleasure, then the more chocolate I eat, the more happy I should become. And we all know that that is not true. There is this point that you think, whoa, I think I took a little bit too much. And then we suffer, right? So if we can engaging in any pleasure that we know in the world, and I want you to think about that tonight, or in the coming 24 hours, any pleasure that you know, think about it. What if I keep doing that activity? And you will find that there is always a point that you think, I'm gonna suffer. When I keep engaging in the activity that makes me feel good, eventually I'm gonna suffer. It changes. So what is pleasure? What is the pleasure that we experience? So Buddhism says the pleasurable moments that we experience is the moment that how to say that? Is the moment that one suffering is finished and the next suffering is about to start. That moment we say is pleasure. So for instance, I sometimes use the example of the shade and the sun, when you are in the shade and it is not such a warm day, you start feeling a little bit chilly and you think, oh, I want to go into the sun, warming up. So the moment you go into the sun, you think, oh, fantastic, right? That moment you move into the sun, the suffering of being in the shade is finished, and the suffering of being in the sun is about to begin. And then you stay in the sun. And at a certain time you feel, oh my gosh, getting hot. I want to go back to the shade. The moment you enter into the shade, you get into the shade, you think, oh, this is so nice, right? The suffering of being in the sun is finished, and the suffering of being in the shade is about to start. That moment we call pleasure. And Buddhism says that pleasure is in the nature of suffering. Because if you would continue that activity that gives you that relief, there's going to be a point that that activity is causing you suffering. So therefore that pleasure is in the nature of suffering. But that is the only pleasure that we have at the moment, right? So we need to know how we can create the causes to experience that. But then at the same time, if we know that it is in the nature of suffering, maybe we don't grasp so strong at them as being real, as being, I want to hold on to that. I want to have more of that, right? We can do that more skillfully, more in accordance with reality. And so the most subtle type of suffering, and I don't think I'm going to manage to talk about that completely today, so I will finish that tomorrow, is the all-pervasive compounded suffering, or the suffering of conditioned existence. So we are conditioned. Even just the fact that as soon as pleasure arises in the mind, attachment follows. And as soon as unpleasant feelings arise, aversion follows. That is a conditioning. We react emotionally, automatically in that way. Conditioned existence comes about in dependence on that self-grasping mind. And because we are conditioned to react in certain ways, we keep repeating the same thing over and over again. And if some of you have done some internal work, I'm sure you know that there are certain issues in your life that come back again and again and again. You're programmed in a certain way that is causing you suffering, but you haven't been able to figure it out in a way that you have completely eliminated from your mind. And you see, I did it again. How did it happen? Right? That's conditioned existence. So tomorrow I will explain a little bit more about what that means. And then from there, we're going to talk about the delusions and how attachment and aversion motivates us to engage in activities all the time, you know. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to do this as clear as I can. Idea about what is actually going on in our mind. What is the problem? How come that problems arise? What are the problems? And where do we make a mistake? Because we do make a mistake. We have tried so many times and we haven't been able to figure it out. Where do we make the mistake? You know, so holding on to inherent existence is the main mistake that we make. And in dependence on that, all the other problems come about. So tomorrow we're going to look more into that self-grasping mind, into that root of cyclic existence and conditioned existence, and then into the delusions themselves. And when we can really see them for what they are, you know, and how they are deceiving us, then we feel like, I want to do this differently, you know, how can we do this differently? And so then the last 3 times we're going to talk about that. There was somebody says it's a practical versus practice thing. I'm not sure what you mean. You have to explain me a little bit more. You can talk more today. We are very happy that we listen to you. Yes, but I also would like to finish with the meditation. And because, you know, talking about the mind is one thing, but then looking into your own mind and recognizing this is this and that is that. And if I move a little bit away from that and I let this happen, then this is going to arise in my mind. You know, if we practice that together, I hope that you're going to get some tools that you feel confidence that you can do this yourself. Right? Becoming your own therapist means that you're going to sit with yourself and you're going to listen to your mind and you're going to look into your mind and you're going to discriminate. This is this and this is this. Oh, here I'm following my pleasurable feelings. This is how attachment looks. Oh my gosh, I never knew it looked like that. Or this is my aversion. How can I do that differently? What do I meet when I start to do this differently? You know, because there are many reasons why we haven't changed these deep-seated habits. If it was easy, we would already have changed it. So I think if we can do that together, it might help you to get confidence that you can make a really good start, that you have the capacity to address the issues that are going on in your mind. All right. And then we can keep repeating this. You know? So today I thought to do a meditation on the clarity of the mind. You know, I talked about the mind is like space, a spacious aspect. But for us, the mind is just clogged up with all these thoughts and these emotions, and it's so busy and it is so full. And what are you talking about? The mind is like space, you know? So we're going to try to connect with that spacious aspect of the mind. And I personally feel that is a very powerful meditation in order to make the mind more peaceful, you know, because you give somehow space, and then these illusions, they can arise and then they can finally dissolve into the mind, instead of that you are keep working with them all the time. Is Dharma practice considered pleasure? One day somebody said, a monk, he said, practicing Dharma is like cutting yourself with a knife without anesthetics. It's not I mean, there can be moments of pleasure, there can be moments of space, there can be, but the practice itself is not where these moments happen most of the time. You know, it's hard work. We are conditioned in a certain way that feels so comfortable, that looks so true, and we have to say goodbye to that. You know, it's not, in that sense, it's not pleasurable. But the results of doing your practice, you know, there you can find a freedom of this conditioned existence, of being a slave to your own programming. That freedom is, it's not pleasure, but it is freedom. I don't know how to say that differently. You know, it's pleasurable, but it's not the same as pleasure. Okay? Don't ask me if you can ask a question that has been on your mind for 45 minutes. You can ask at any time, any question you want. And I'm going to look at them again, you know, and then tomorrow I will come back to what fits in the teaching from tomorrow. Okay? Is it okay if I stop now and go to the meditation? So I know that some of you feel that, you know, I don't know if you do not want to do the meditation or that you don't have time to do the meditation and you want to do it later. But I would encourage you not to just, you know, listen to the teachings and then that's it. The real change happens by practice, and meditation is a tool for practice. And so if you even don't have time to do it now, try to do it later. Try to do it on your own if you prefer that, you know, whatever works for you. But try not to just listen to the teachings and then forget to put it into practice, because then you really miss, I think, a big opportunity that you have. Okay. So then we settle the mind. We give ourselves a little bit of time to relax the mind. And so it is helpful to start every meditation with remembering your posture and with going through your posture, making sure that you sit in a comfortable position, that your back is straight, that your right hand is on top of the left, the thumbs slightly touching each other. The elbows a little bit away from the torso. Your head is a little bit bent forward. The jaws are relaxed. The tongue is touching the palate just behind the teeth. And your eyes are closed, but allow a little bit of light to come in. By going through these points, you bring your mind to the present moment. Because your body is always in the present moment. And when you bring your mind to the present moment, the disturbing emotions naturally subside. So during the meditation, you let your mind rest on your body. If you prefer, you can also let it rest on your breath. And then part of your mind reflects, analyzes. And when you start doing that, it can be that you lose connection with your body. So if that happens, you just go back to your body, reconnect with the present moment, and then you try to analyze again. So the nature of the mind is that which is clear and knowing. The nature of the mind is clear means the mind is like space. It has no characteristics of its own. It has no color, no shape. We can't touch it. Because it is like space, it allows qualities to arise in it. These qualities can be positive, such as love, compassion, or they can be negative, such as our disturbing emotions. And they can also be neutral, like sleep. The nature of the mind is that which is clear and knowing. And the nature of whatever arises in the mind is also clear and knowing. So the nature of our wisdom mind is clear and knowing. The nature of our loving mind is clear and knowing. And also the nature of our deluded mind is clear and knowing. Whatever arises in the mind is just like the mind itself, clear and knowing. It is like space. It has no substance, no color, no shape. Although whatever arises in the mind has the same nature of the mind, it is not the mind itself. We can compare the nature of the mind with the blue sky. And whatever arises in the mind, our thoughts, feelings, and emotions, with the clouds in the sky. Although the clouds appear in the sky, they are not the sky itself. The clouds come and go, just as your thoughts, feelings, and emotions come and go. Normally, we are mainly focused on what arises in the mind, as if we are only focusing on the clouds in the sky. But just as the clouds are not the nature of the blue sky, whatever arises in our mind is not the nature of the mind. Sometimes the sky is full of clouds, so much that we can't see the blue sky anymore. Not being able to see the blue sky doesn't mean that the blue sky doesn't exist. The blue sky is always there. Although the blue sky is covered by clouds, the clouds can never touch or change the nature of the blue sky. In the same way, sometimes our mind is overwhelmed with delusions and we can't remember our true nature. But that doesn't mean that our true nature doesn't exist. Our true nature is always there. And although the delusions can cover the nature of our mind, they can never touch or pollute the nature of our mind. Imagine being on the top of a mountain and staring at the sky that is completely clear and free of clouds. Concentrate on this vast, unobstructed emptiness. Imagine that it flows down and embraces you and your surroundings. Everything becomes empty like space. Hold this experience and feel that the nature of your mind is like this clear, empty space. Your mind is vast. Let it expand more and more. This spacious aspect of the mind is always there. Our mind has habituated with focusing on whatever arises in the mind. And we never look at that space. But once you focus your mind on the space, it can seem that all these things that were bothering you, they naturally disappear. They don't matter. They become small, unimportant. And being connected with the nature of our mind, the spacious aspect of the mind, will allow our wisdom mind more easy to arise. And it will help us to soften the mind. And then coming to the end of today's teaching and meditation, we can dedicate all the positive energy that we have created by listening, reflecting, meditating to the happiness and well-being of all sentient beings. Thank you very much for being here. I hope to see you all tomorrow, same time, 5 o'clock Indian time. And then we're going to go deeper into conditioned existence and into the delusions, seeing them for what they are. Enjoy your evening, take good care of yourself, and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.